Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the Coach House podcast. My name is James Lindsay. On this show, Ian Williams gives us his favorite sentence ever.
Suddenly, I'm in this public space, but I'm into the space of fiction, right? And suddenly, I forgot myself in the span of 20 words, 25 words or something? And that's what a good first sentence does.
Robert McGill answers repeatedly our stupid author questions.
And nobody judges you about your favorite foods, right? But they judge you based on who you name as your favorite writer.
And Virginia Woolf scholar Mark Hussey interviews Coach House author Sina Queyras about their new book, Rooms, Women, Writing, and Woolf.
When I think about the Woolf of 1988, she was not, she was not on the lips of all the Academy in the way she is now, right? That's the other thing people don't realize.
Right now, if you had to pick a favorite sentence, could you? Ian Williams can. It's the opening sentence from Meg Wolitzer's The Wife. Here he is explaining why it hits him so hard. Hi, Ian.
Hi, James.
Can you please introduce yourself?
So my name is Ian Williams. I'm the author of 6 books of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Most recently, Disorientation and Word Problems, which is from Coach House Books. And my novel Reproduction won the 2019 Scotiabank Giller Prize.
Yay! Ian, can you please tell us what your favorite sentence is?
So I love this assignment here. This is a sentence from Meg Wolitzer's book called The Wife, and it's the very first sentence of that book. Here it is. The moment I decided to leave him, the moment I thought, enough. We were 35,000 feet above the ocean, hurtling forward, but giving the illusion of stillness and tranquility.
Oh my.
Right?
Well, I've got some questions, but first, can you just start off by telling us why you love this sentence so much?
Oh, okay, so there are a few reasons here. Do you want the literary reason or the personal reason first?
Let's start with literary.
Because as a sentence itself, it's just beautifully constructed that pulls you forward, with each comma, right? You can't stop. So the moment I decided to leave him, leave who? What's going on? The moment I thought, enough, and it's that word italicized in the book, enough. She's had enough. We were 35,000 feet above the ocean. Okay, where are they going? Hurtling forward, but giving the illusion of stillness and tranquility, and the tension between you're zooming through the air, but inside the cabin, the lights are dim, the flight attendants are coming around really calmly. So there's just so much context packed into that sentence. It's incredible.
That's amazing. There's an immense amount of information. It reminds me of those like almost a flash fiction short story. That could be the book.
It really could be, right? You got enough backstory suggested. They're going forward. Yeah, it's pretty brilliant.
Oh, that's amazing. And how about personally? Why do you like that sentence?
So I found this book. I was waiting in a library in Paris. It was my first day there. I had just come off a plane, and I was waiting for someone, and the book was a display item, a display copy on the bookshelf behind me. And so I reached behind me, and I was just going to amuse myself reading while waiting for this person. And I tell you, I saw the title of the book, The Wife. It was a hardcover. And then I flipped open, and I read this first sentence. And I was like, I'm going to check out this display copy. I don't care what's going to happen or what matters. But it was a thing that was able to sort of separate me from the real world. And suddenly I'm in this public space, but I'm into the space of fiction, right? And that's what a good first sentence does. It cuts you off from whatever the world is and whatever your problems and anxieties are. And suddenly I forgot myself in the span of 20 words, 25 words or something?
And you had just gotten off a plane yourself then.
Right. So there was that kind of resonance too. And I'm writing about, the present book is dealing with sort of marriage and committed relationships and stuff. And it just spoke to me on a number of different points, right?
That's incredible. That's almost like an ideal scenario for how, as a publisher, you want your reader to get the
Right.
book, right? You
Right,
want
right.
that first sentence to hit so hard like that.
Yeah, I would spend money on that, right? If it wasn't the library, I would buy that book right there and then on that first sentence alone. Yeah, that's a lot of pressure on the first sentence.
Is that how you usually peruse books when you're in a bookstore? Do you always go to a first sentence or a sentence in the book?
I kind of sort of go for the beautiful object first, right? I sort of look around, I look at the cover, I look at the back cover, I read the flaps, I do a little flip through, and then, yeah, if the story's compelling enough, I'll read like the first paragraph or whatever. And then I do this random thing. I do this with my own books too, right? The random sentence, like every sentence should be a good one. And so I flip through and I say, what is the quality of the writing like throughout this? I read a little snippets of dialogue. Like I give it a kind of, like imagine going to a doctor and getting a physical. I give the book a kind of like, a quick couple of minute physical, right? So
the good once over, sort of make sure it's a good working order. It's almost like I picture like a mechanic like kicking the tires.
That's right. Tap the knee a little bit. Yeah. Is that sentence on page 35 going to hold up? Yeah. Let's see. Yeah.
Do you put a lot of pressure? This is my last question will be, do you put a lot of pressure on yourself for opening sentences then?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't write them till pretty late as well, right? And this comes as a bit of a shock to people. Like I don't fuss about the words until fairly late in the process. For fiction, poetry is different. But for fiction, I'll get the story right, I'll get the parts right, I'll get the structure right. And then I go back, and this is where the writing really starts to feel, well, there are different kinds of pleasures, right? But this pleasure is really particular, where I just spend a couple of drafts just on the sentences, right? And getting that right. So that comes later. It's almost like my dessert part of the editing process. And the first sentences come at that point. Yeah.
So you don't really bog yourself down when you're in the moment writing. It's just coming and coming, and then you sort of worry about the I want to say accuracy or sort of details later.
The actual like shape and feel and weight and mood and all of that of the sentence. It's hard to separate that, right? I mean, I'm working in sentences all throughout the process, right? So they're there, and the shape of my mind is there in general. But that other level of just kind of precision and specificity, and the language and the words sort of echoing a little bit later and stuff, that comes quite a bit later.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question, Ian Williams, about sentences, which is you write fiction, you write prose, and you write poetry. Do you approach the sentence differently for poetry and fiction, and how does that work in your mind? Or is there a difference?
For sure. Yeah, in fiction and poetry, I have the other advantage of having a line, right? So there's a sentence and the line break and the tension between those two. Like I can chop a sentence in half, and I wish I could do this more in fiction. I feel free in fiction, but I know that's just going to be annoying for a reader. So I can sort of highlight and emphasize and de-emphasize parts of a sentence in poetry just by placement within a line or how long the line is. So I'm always playing with that tension between line and sentence in poetry. And in fiction, I like a little bit more roll, right? I like a little bit more like dance music in my fiction to sort of keep the beat and the propulsion going, right? And to roll along. Yeah, and like reproduction, before she died, her mother was, before she died, before, it kind of like revs itself up a few times and fails, and then it sort of like roars off right into the rest of the story. So yeah, different feelings. Yeah, James.
It sort of reminds me of like almost like when a race car driver's like gunning their engine at the beginning.
You just got to press that throttle a little bit there, right? At the beginning in fiction. And you can cut all of that like preamble stuff.
Yeah.
But to like psych yourself up even as you're writing, sometimes you need it just to create verbal energy.
Yes.
With the sentence, and then the real sentence can be mature and dignified and whatever you need it to be.
Ian Williams, thank you for joining us on the Coach House podcast.
Oh, that was a pleasure, James.
There are no stupid questions, unless you're an author being put on the spot in an interview. To answer today's stupid author question is Robert McGill, author of A Suitable Companion for the End of Your Life. Today we have Robert McGill. You can introduce yourself, Robert?
Hi, I'm Robert McGill. I'm a novelist. I'm a short story writer. I teach at the University of Toronto. I've got a new novel coming out this June. It's called A Suitable Companion for the End of Your Life.
Robert, what is the worst question for writers?
Well, the worst question for me is, who's your favorite writer? And I should say, the problem's not the question really. It's me. I dislike answering questions where I have to give a head-on, truthful answer. If I liked giving head-on, truthful answers, I would not be a novelist. That's the great thing about fiction. When you're writing it, you can be truthful without being head-on. You can be head-on without being truthful. Fiction gives you that layer of protection. I don't know. I don't even, again, know what it means to have a favorite writer. Does it mean reading that author's books the most, or does it mean you think they're the best writer? And those two things don't always go together. I'm very happy to read the Dune novels over and over, but I don't think of Frank Herbert as a master of character or style or various other things I admire in writing. And I think that, to say I have a favorite writer, I feel like I have to have read most of the author's work. But I, for one, I have this rule where I don't read more than one book by a writer unless I have a really good reason. Why is this? It's because I want to get to everybody at least once, every single writer in the world. I want to read at least one of their books. And then only after I've done that, I'm going to start into round two. I, for instance, have read only one novel by Kazuo Ishiguro. It was The Remains of the Day. It was one of the best novels I've ever read. And you think I'd be like drooling to read more of his stuff. But it goes the other way, I think. I read a book like that, it seems almost perfect. And I think, well, I don't want to read more by that author because the rest just can't possibly match it. And then, there's the fact that when I'm asked who my favorite writer is, I feel like I'm a kid. I'm a kid again, being asked to choose teams on the playground and make the first pick. I mean, if I say my favorite author is Andre Alexis, somehow I know it's going to get back to Margaret Atwood, and I'm just going to get that call. She's the kind of person, she'd never say her feelings are hurt, right? She's just going to say something like, oh, I would have said Andre Alexis too. That's what she's like. I mean, here's what she's like. Okay. I once wrote a negative. No, it wasn't even a negative review. It was like kind of a negative review of one of her novels. I mean, it wasn't negative. Like there were typos, like all the way through. I maybe called it Oryx and Cake. And you know what she did? She wrote me a thank you letter, hand delivered by her assistant, a hand-delivered thank you letter for reviewing her book. And she finished it with a PS that asked me to look outside. And I went out, and sitting there on the street with a bow on top was a Mazda Miata. And sure, that sounds nice of her, right? But she knew what she was doing. It was insidious because I still, even now, every time I take that car out on weekends, I still feel so guilty about writing that review. Now, is any of that true? No. Do I even know Margaret Atwood? I do not. But whenever I get asked who's your favorite writer, I start creating these paranoid fantasies. And that's why I hate the question.
Well, that's a very good answer, Robert. Is there a less anxiety-inducing way to ask this question? Is there a better way to say, like, maybe who's like the most, would it be better if we said who's the most influential writer for you? Is that a better way to approach this in your mind?
That sounds better. James, I think I could answer that question more easily.
So it's easier for you, though, to say maybe what your favorite book is. Like you mentioned Remains of the Day. We don't have to talk about Remains of the Day, but is it easier for you to pick a book then than it would be an author?
The same pressures start to apply, though, because every time there's a book, there's an author behind it. And I just start thinking about that person and all the feelings start to come. I think I'm just deeply interpersonally connected to people with whom I actually have no interpersonal relationship.
That's kind of what writing is, right? It's a pretty intense relationship with people you may never meet.
That is a beautiful definition of what literature is, and a beautiful indication of why I find it so difficult.
How about, I want to take one more stab at this. How about, let's say, when you were a kid, when you first start reading, is there a book that you can think of, a writer you can think of, who maybe got you into literature, let's say, opposed to just reading, or maybe someone who really turned you on a book or an author in terms of you wanting to be a writer? How about that? Can we think of it, the question like that?
That is a terrific question. And, it might actually be a little revealing because my favorite writer when I was very young was Gordon Corman. Canadian children's author. And, he himself started publishing, I think when he was in grade 8, something
he was
ridiculously
very
precocious. Anyhow, so I loved his work. I read everything he'd written many times over. And then I actually got a chance to meet him, and I got asked to actually give a little speech introducing him at a young authors conference. I think I was in grade 5 or something. And I just completely froze up. It was so embarrassing. They say never meet your heroes. I think they mean something else than what was applying to me in this case, where I was like, I just shouldn't have met him because it was just too terrifying. And maybe this is it. Maybe this is why I just can't name a favorite anymore. I have this like foundational trauma with respect to it. But James, I should also observe that you have now asked me my most hated question in several different formats now. I'm curious as to what's going on here too.
I just feel like I feel your anxiety about answering this question is more interesting than the question itself in many ways. I agree with you 100%, especially as a writer. Having to answer this is a lot of pressure, especially knowing other people who've written books. Like you always feel like there's a moment your friend's going to be like, oh, I thought it was me. I thought I was your favorite writer. Do you ever think that your books might have meant something to somebody? Like maybe you're, I'm not trying, only a narcissist thinks like I'm someone's favorite writer. But do you think, could you at least appreciate that your books might have reached someone, might have done something for someone, might have influenced someone in that way?
I mean, that's always the hope. You occasionally hear from people who say as much, and that's a great affirmation. But even when I don't hear from somebody on any particular day, I'm writing partly with the hope that it's going to reach somebody somehow. And gosh, there are a lot of books out there, and so that your book is not necessarily going to reach everybody. But I think too about being that little kid reading Gordon Corman and a lot of other writers, and I think about how much certain books affected me, and so that the fact, that experience, being affected in that way, I think is one thing that motivates me to write and hopefully reach other people in a similar way.
Robert, thank you so much for appearing on the Coach House podcast and for answering a stupid question that sounds like causes you a bit of anxiety. I'm sorry to make you relive all that.
Well, it's my pleasure, James. I'm going to take the afternoon to just decompress. It's going to be great.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.
We wanted to do something special to celebrate the publication of Rooms, Women Writing in Woolf, by Lambda Literary Award winner and one of our favorite authors, Sina Queyras. Rooms is a peek into the defining spaces Sina moved through as a young queer writer and their passionate relationship to Virginia Woolf. So we asked renowned critic, teacher, and Woolf scholar Mark Hussey to have a chat with them. Sina is the author of My Ariel, M×T, Expressway, Lemonhound, and most recently Rooms, all from Coach House. And Mark's latest book is Clive Bell and the Making of Modernism from Bloomsbury Publishing.
Well, one thing that I have been thinking about recently is the Woolf conference was a couple of weeks ago, and the last keynote was a wonderful, moving talk by Beth Doherty, who has a book coming out on how Woolf teaches through her essays. And Beth was speaking about, growing up in Appalachia and being poor and going to graduate school and feeling like a real imposter. And yet somehow Woolf spoke to her. And I was reminded of that because you talk a couple of times in the book about your struggles in the educational world. You talk about your impoverished education, and yet you also have this confidence mixed, you say directly, mixed with my doubt was obviously a confidence, and that you have this absolute bedrock of self-confidence, and yet also in the context of feeling, kind of an unworthiness, so to speak. So is that related to your reading of Woolf, or could you talk a little bit about that?
For me, what you've just asked is the most interesting thing about Woolf, how everything is sort of hinged in the work. And that includes the way that she moves in and out of, I think, her own mastery and query the wondering, and then I kept asking myself as I was writing, what is the difference between self-doubt and confidence and kind of curiosity, right? Because that's something that came up again and again, and it comes up with my experience of reading her.
Yeah, that's it. Because self-doubt, it can be a doubt that's sort of paralyzing, but it can also be, and I think that's something in your book that's also in Woolf, is this sense that everything is provisional. I thought it was wonderful how you use her essays, because I think, Woolf has this reputation of being a difficult writer that frightens many people off, and yet her essays aren't so well known, I think, as her fiction, in the sense of like her reputation is for her experimental fiction. But you really pointed out how the essays are a way in, and they're sort of her way of establishing a relationship that might lead you, and it seemed that was your way also, because you went through a room of one's own.
Well, I attempted. Yeah, an attempted way, but I think I remember speaking to you around the 2003 conference, and kind of trying to figure out, what is my relationship to Woolf, and how can I, it was around the time I was writing Lemon Hound. And I wasn't sure what to do with this compulsion, right? And I wasn't sure, am I supposed to write essays? Am I supposed to kind of go down that road and become a Woolf scholar? You can see, and I guess why Room of One's Own is so fascinating to me is I can see that it's a culmination of all of those years of thinking, right? And it comes just at the point where it's all coming together for her, and it's just it's a natural extension of all of those essays and all of the observations and all of that time, and then that the flame with Vida was just sort of the match with Vida was sort of struck the flame. So it's just like this explosive clarity that seems to come out of nowhere. But of course, if you're reading the essays, you realize, oh yeah, this has just been building and building and building over time. It's amazing.
There's a thread of violence throughout your book, throughout Rooms, both explicit, violence of being attacked, being hit, and also a kind of threat of an undercurrent of violence. And at the end, you speak of coming to our voices through violence, and it's something that I don't think has received much attention in commentary on Woolf, but I think it's certainly there. And is that thread of violence something you've found resonating in Woolf's writing as well?
I mean, I think it is there. You can see it in Mrs. Dalloway. I think, but even in the waves, there's like a sense of kind of trembling under a leaf. Sometimes I get that feeling of, especially early on. But then the violence is also, it can feel visceral, but also there's like an intellectual violence and like a kind of corporeal violence, where kind of dipping under the storyline, the perceived storyline, can feel violent. It's like, you're, or it can be what we call being woke right now. We call being awake or whatever. I think that similarly for Woolf, there was always this kind of possibility of seeing through the grape, or seeing through the veil, seeing through basically the thin kind of strand of morality or civility that was sort of keeping everything in check. So, I mean, I guess I guess it's always there for me, even when it's, it's not a direct violence, but there's always kind of the threat of violence, and always kind of also the threat, the awareness, I think, of the kind of colonial violence that's being enacted, right, and capitalist violence. So there's all these kinds of ways in which violence is happening, both in the text and also in her thinking, and you can see it in the diaries as well. The awareness of, she's kind of those moments where she's suddenly like, oh, this isn't right, and I have a part in it, But yeah, for me, coming to Woolf too, I mean, it was like 1988, 1989. I guess 88 is what I'm thinking of. Kind of reading Women of One's Own in that horrible class with Professor Norton, but then also being in a women's studies class and having these conversations and feeling like, I remember always going to the back corner where I could see the door, because I had this visceral feeling that at any moment some man was going to burst into the room and just like end it all, because the conversations that we were having in that room were so I was terrified having those conversations. I was terrified of talking about the violence that was around us. I was terrified after, coming out into the world of AIDS and coming out into this world where, people, hate was pretty palpable on the street. People would come in from the suburbs trying to, beat up queer people. And, we were still enmeshed in trying to get abortion rights. So there was a lot of violence. And as I say in the book also, I came out through a resource-based world in which there were, there workmen. Some of my first jobs was taking care of workmen, and I was brought up to sort of, their needs were really paramount. That they were what made the world go around. And I always had to be aware of those, that sort of particularly strand of working class males.
When you were speaking, I was flooded with phrases from, things like it's extremely dangerous to live even one day, or the world has raised its whip, where will it descend, that kind of thing. And I think your book is so full of life and success and promise, but it also has this, as I said, a sort of thread of violence experience and noticed and recognized all the way through, which I think was particularly powerful. Great read. And it also moved me in a way, because it sort of made me think how it's possible to write about one's own relationship to Woolf.
Exactly. Well, and it must be so different, because I don't think I'm mistaken when I think about the Woolf of 1988. Like, she was not, she was not on the lips of all the academy in the way she is now, right? That's the other thing people don't realize.
Oh yeah. It's amazing to see the Woolf community has expanded sort of all over the world, and it's for the people who are entering it now, who are graduate students or early career, and they sort of take for granted, yes, this is a major writer, but of course it was not that at all decades ago.
No.
But I thought a lot about my own trajectory reading your work, because I was a Jesuit-educated child and somehow ended up being a Woolf scholar, and I've often thought, how did that happen?
Wow.
And it's
I'd like to hear about that. You must remember the first time you read her.
Yes, I read To the Lighthouse when I was 17, because in England you do A-levels, so you have a pretty set curriculum for 2 years, and the English teacher said we should all read something not on the syllabus, just not to do, not preparation for an exam, and he gave us a list of books, and I randomly chose To the Lighthouse. And usually with a writer I like, I just go back to the beginning and read everything. So I loved it, and I got The Voyage Out, and I read everything, and then the narrative I've constructed for myself is that Woolf helped me escape the church. It's like, it's this deeply spiritual writer who thinks the whole idea of God is just absurd.
Yeah.
So.
Right? It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy. Well, I would personally love to hear about the early Woolf, your days. I think it's really essential, because I don't think people have that kind of the history of that moment, and the importance of her work coming out when it did, and how it kind of fell in, which you do such a great job in A to Z, by the way. I was like, every time I thought I was going to have something to say about Woolf, I was like, looked in there, nope. Already observed. Wow.
Well, this was great. Thank you. And thanks for your work. Yeah.
Thank you. Talk soon.
That's our show. Thank you to Ian Williams, Robert McGill, Sina Queyras, and Mark Hussey for appearing. I only sound this good because of the production of Andrew Kaufman. Thank you for listening. Episode 4 will be along soon.